In a world where deserts are expanding faster than forests can grow, one nation dared to fight back, not with weapons, but with life itself. This is the story of how China turned a sea of sand into a garden of hope. A story that begins in the heart of northern China, where the wind once whispered only one word: desolation. For centuries, the Kubuqi Desert was a vast ocean of dunes, endless, golden, and merciless. Stretching across more than 7,000 square miles, it devoured everything in its path. Villages vanished beneath the sand. Roads disappeared overnight. The people who once called this place home fled for survival. And yet, a few stayed. Farmers, Reclamation revolution. The Kubuqi Desert wasn't always barren. Ancient records describe rivers winding through grasslands, where caravans of the Silk Road once passed, trading silk, spices, and dreams between east and west. But centuries of overgrazing, deforestation, and climate change stripped the land bare. The roots that once held the soil vanished, and once the wind found its freedom, it carved the earth into dunes that rolled like waves across the horizon. By the 1980s, more than 70% of the land surrounding Kubuqi had been lost to desertification. Local farmers lived on the edge of survival. Each year, more farmland turned to dust. Children walked to school through storms that darkened the sky at noon. The desert was not just a place, it was a living enemy. And for the Chinese government, this was more than an environmental disaster. It was a crisis of human survival. Entire provinces were losing their productivity. Rural poverty deepened. Millions were at risk of displacement. Something had to change. But the question was, how? How do you stop a force of nature that has been growing for centuries? That's when the unthinkable happened. A coalition of scientists, farmers, engineers, and visionaries united under a single impossible goal: to reclaim the desert. Every great revolution begins with a dreamer. In the story of Kubuqi, that dreamer was a man named Wang Wenbiao, a former salt truck driver turned eco-visionary, known today as the Desert King. In the late 1980s, Wang worked for a local salt company that transported goods across the Kubuqi Desert. Every trip was a battle. Sand buried the roads faster than they could be cleared. His trucks sank, his workers suffered, and the desert seemed unstoppable. But instead of fleeing, Wang's large-scale project under Elian Resources Group, partnering with the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. This marked the birth of natural engineering, a unique fusion of ecological science, local wisdom, and human innovation. The goal wasn't to conquer nature, but to work with it. And soon, they would take a step so bold, so unconventional, that it shocked even the scientists on the team. It started with laughter and skepticism. The idea: release 1 million rabbits into the desert. To most, it sounded absurd, but the science behind it was surprisingly elegant. Rabbits in controlled populations can eat invasive desert weeds that block new plants from taking root. Their droppings act as natural fertilizer, rich in nitrogen and minerals that help regenerate topsoil. And by burrowing, they create microhabitats, tiny shaded pockets where seeds can sprout and moisture can collect. In short, they were natural engineers, small creatures capable of preparing the ground for plant life. The experiment began on a small test site in the late 1990s. Dozens of rabbits were released into fenced plots of sand. Scientists monitored their behavior, soil changes, and vegetation growth. Within months, the results were astonishing. Grasses began to appear. Within a year, new shrubs took hold. Encouraged by this, the project scaled up. Soon, thousands, and eventually over 1 million rabbits were introduced across the controlled zones of the Kubuqi Desert, working hand in paw with other restoration methods: drip irrigation, organic composting, and solar-powered water systems. What began as an experiment became a movement. Villagers joined in, raising rabbits for both ecology and economy. Children were taught how the creatures helped the land heal, and for the first time in living memory, the sands began to show hints of green. 1 million rabbits may sound like a fable, but in Kubuqi, it became a symbol, proof that even the smallest lives can ignite a revolution. As the soil improved, the next phase began: reforestation. But planting trees in a desert isn't as simple as digging holes. Every drop of water counts. Every root must survive brutal winds and scorching heat. The team turned to willow trees, nature's champions of endurance. Willows grow fast, their roots hold sand in place, and they thrive even in salty soil. But more importantly, they form the backbone of what scientists called the zero-waste ecocycle. Here's how it worked. Rabbits and livestock enriched the soil, willows and shrubs anchored the dunes, solar panels powered water pumps that irrigated the plants. The trees absorbed carbon, while their leaves and branches were harvested for biofuel and medicine. And the community, once trapped in poverty, now had jobs, income, and stability. What was once a wasteland was becoming a self-sustaining ecosystem to build and to live. From above, the transformation was breathtaking. What had once been a vast expanse of gold and gray now shimmered with shades of green and silver. The Kubuqi Desert, once called the Sea of Death, was coming alive. In satellite images, the change was visible year after year, a living time-lapse of rebirth. Patches of vegetation appeared like brushstrokes across the dunes. Villages once buried in sand were surrounded again by trees and grass. It was as if nature herself had begun painting her lost masterpiece back onto the earth. Filmmakers from across the world began to arrive, from Discovery Channel, National Geographic, and environmental networks around the globe. They called it the desert that changed color, a place that went from despair to wonder within a single generation. But beneath the beauty lay an even deeper story, one of science, innovation, and human unity. The transformation wasn't magic, it was method. An intricate dance between technology and nature. Behind every green blade of grass was data. Behind every thriving tree, a carefully calculated system of micro-irrigation, root protection, and solar energy distribution. And behind it all, the relentless spirit of the people who refused to surrender to the sand. As the land turned green, a new light began to shine. Solar power. The Kubuqi region, once considered too hostile for life, had one abundant resource: sunlight. Scientists realized that if they could harness that energy, it could fuel not only the ecological restoration, but also a new kind of economy. And so began the next chapter: China's solar desert revolution. Rows upon rows of solar panels were installed across the reclaimed dunes, black mirrors reflecting the once mocking sun. They powered irrigation systems that fed the trees and plants. They generated electricity for nearby villages, schools, and industries. And in time, they turned the Kubuqi Desert into one of the largest solar eco-industrial zones in Asia. Farmers who once battled the desert now earned income by maintaining the panels, planting under them, and producing solar-generated herbs and crops. Every kilowatt-hour produced was a step closer to a self-sustaining ecosystem. This symbiosis of energy and ecology became a model for the world, how renewable power could drive not just cities, but deserts themselves back to life. As one local engineer proudly said, "Here, the sun no longer burns us, it feeds us." Through innovation, they had transformed the enemy, bringing with them insects, birds, and small mammals. Wind speeds dropped, and air quality improved for entire provinces. Children played where their parents once feared to walk. Elders sat beneath the shade of trees that hadn't existed in their youth. The desert, once a symbol of death, had become a living classroom, a story of rebirth that the whole world could learn from. Documentary teams captured scenes of farmers walking through green valleys, planting willows where dunes once stood. The hum of solar pumps replaced the howling wind, and the once empty horizon now shimmered with life. But beyond the beauty, something profound had changed in the hearts of the people. They no longer saw themselves as victims of nature, but as partners in her recovery. Local schools began teaching eco-engineering as a subject. Young students studied the success of their own homeland, how technology and biology worked together to heal the earth, and neighboring regions began to copy the Kubuqi model, from the Tengar Desert in China to pilot projects in Africa and the Middle East. Environmental scientists often compare Kubuqi to other global desert reclamation projects, particularly in Australia's outback, another region scarred by deforestation, drought, and soil erosion. In both cases, the challenges were similar: extreme temperatures, limited water, and fragile ecosystems. But the methods differed. In Australia, many projects relied heavily on mechanical interventions, artificial irrigation, imported soil, and large-scale replanting of non-native trees. China's approach, however, leaned toward nature-based solutions, Methods inspired directly by ecological balance rather than domination. Instead of replacing nature, China sought to rebuild its natural logic, letting rabbits, willows, and wind barriers form a living cycle of renewal. From the heart of China's deserts to the screens of the world, the story of Kubuqi became a symbol of human resilience, a living documentary of what's possible when hope and science walk hand in hand. Nations from Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia now study its model, adapting its methods to fight their own battles against desertification. The United Nations hails it as a global green example, proof that environmental recovery and economic growth can coexist.